Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. We begin today in West Africa, where the police in Cameroon have fired tear gas at people taking part in opposition protests in the country's biggest city of Douala. Reports say 31 members of the opposition party, which called today's nationwide protest to call for the resignation of President Paul Biya, were also arrested. Earlier, campaign group Human Rights Watch accused the Cameroonian government of using the coronavirus pandemic as an excuse to quell the right to assemble. A nationwide call for anti-government protests was made by the MRC-CRM party. South Sudan has added its voice to the demand of the African Union for 2 permanent seats at the UN Security Council table. President Salva Kiir made this known in a video message to the UN General Assembly, which marked its 75th anniversary on Monday. The UN Security Council, the most powerful body of the organization, tasked with maintaining global peace and security, is made of 5 permanent members: USA, UK, France, Russia and China. It also has 10 members elected for a 2-year term by the UN General Assembly. However, only the permanent members of the Council have the veto power.
75 years since the founding of the United Nations, the geopolitical realities in the world have changed, and UN Security Council remains the same. This situation cannot remain the same any longer. And that is why I'm adding my voice to the demand by the African Union for 2 permanent members, permanent seats in the Security Council. Africans demand this because we are the most affected by the Council's decisions and resolutions.
Meanwhile, South Sudan's first Vice President Riek Machar will not participate in this year's National Dialogue Conference. Dr. Machar, who was to participate in the closing ceremony, but organizers say he has withdrawn, citing reservations due to lack of implementation of some provisions of the 2018 Revitalized Peace Agreement. The National Dialogue, initiated by President Salva Kiir in December 2016, is aimed at discussing solutions to end political and communal violence in the country. It also seeks to find ways of addressing the fear of political domination by some ethnic groups and resolve resource sharing among all groups. Let's get more on this story from the VOA's Naba Mohideen, who joins us live from Khartoum. Thanks for joining us on the program, Naba.
Thank you so much.
How is the government reacting to Riek Machar's withdrawal from this year's National Dialogue Conference?
Actually, the withdrawal has not a very big reaction because it's expected, as Dr. Riek Machar was not part of the ongoing national dialogue. It was not one of his agendas. He already has an agreement with Salva Kiir, so the national dialogue was not one of his agendas. He already took a position from this national dialogue, and it has already started before his signature with the Salva Kiir. So right now it has not a very big reaction.
So you're saying it's not really surprising, but what impact is his absence going to have on the conference and the peace process as a whole?
Actually, it has a very big impact because Dr. Riek Machar represents the opposition, so it will affect the political operation in the South Sudan. So it's definitely will hamper the peace, the ongoing peace process and the national dialogue. Yes, he's not part of it, but it's going to give a sign for the political parties that the opposition, which is part of the ruling government, is not in the national dialogue. So it will hamper the political atmosphere and it will shock it.
Well, we understand that President Kiir has refused to appoint General Johnson Maloney, who was nominated by Mr. Machar as governor of the largest oil-producing state of Upper Nile. Can you tell us why?
Actually, analysts thinks that the refusal is a pressure card on the opposition generally and on Dr. Riek Machar particularly because he is in his side, he is his right hand, he has the biggest military troops and powers in the Upper Nile, and Upper Nile is very big and influential and a big area. So if he refuses the appointment, he will push on the opposition and will push on Dr. Riyad Michel, and then there will be very few options whether he will join him, his side, and make an agreement. So the opposition will lose areas and grounds, especially on the military side.
So before I let you go, what's the way forward, Naba? How can South Sudan get the peace process back on track?
Actually, the only way to get the peace process achieved is by abiding the agreement. Yes, it has a lot of deficiencies. There is a lot of deficiencies, especially the security arrangement agreement. But only that way, by abiding the current agreement, and both parties, all of the parties, if they abide it, it will prevent from war, and it might pave the way for a comprehensive peace in South Sudan and can get back to the peace.
All right, then, VOA's Naba Mohidin, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you.
Let's move on to the Democratic Republic of Congo now, where President Felix Tshisekedi has held a rare meeting with his predecessor, Joseph Kabila, amid tension in their coalition. The Common Front for Congo coalition tweeted that the two leaders discussed the progress of the coalition. Despite winning the presidency, Mr. Tshisekedi has had to come to an agreement with Mr. Kabila's party, which controls the majority of seats in parliament. Negotiations between the two parties took 7 months before a consensus was found so that a government could be formed. However, relations between the two parties have been tense, with rival politicians exchanging verbal abuse and in some cases using physical violence. After years of conflict and months-long process of negotiation and talks among elders, politicians, women and youth peace activists, the residents of the historic coastal city of Maka, south of Somalia's capital city of Mogadishu, are now enjoying the dividends of peace. Life is back to normal, schools are open, business is booming, and people continue to return to the town. The city has regained its status of one of Somalia's most peaceful, thriving communities.
In early 2012, heavy fighting broke out in the historic coastal city of Marka in the Lower Shabelle region. This was the start of one of the fiercest and longest feuds in the country, involving the two main communities living there.
The Bioma believed they were the owners of this land and that the Haber Gidir had no right to live here.
The fighting raged on for 6 years, uprooting thousands of people from their homes and farmlands and leaving a trail of death and destruction in its wake.
Schools were closed as parents feared sending their children out. Homes were deserted and there were no medical facilities.
Berlin Abdullahi Muhammad, a resident of Marka turned peace activist, recounts women's ordeals.
As women, we have gone through really tough times. We have lost our sons and husbands in these conflicts and wars. There was an incident where a pregnant woman gave birth under a tree and bled to death due to lack of medical services.
Gradually, over a few years of fighting, views on the conflict started to soften somewhat. Elders from both Herbagidi and Biyomal sub-clans were brought together by mutual friends.
We realized we were fighting over nothing, so we agreed as elders to first of all reconcile amongst ourselves, then try to end the conflict.
We agreed on 3 resolutions: a cessation of hostilities, the holding of a more inclusive peace conference in Marka, and integrating the sub-clan militia into the government forces.
Now, residents of Marka are enjoying the dividends of peace. Life is back to normal, and they now serve as an example that peace can be shaped by like-minded people through dialogue.
Now, former Mali Defense Minister and retired Colonel Bandol has been named as the interim president of the country, while the leader of the junta that seized power last month, Colonel Assimi Goïta, has been appointed as the vice president. Mali's ruling junta has come under intense pressure from ECOWAS leaders to return power to civilians following the August 18 coup that overthrew President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. It's unclear if the new arrangement will satisfy ECOWAS, which last week threatened to set up economic sanctions and impose a total embargo on landlocked Mali if its conditions are not met. The European Union has imposed sanctions on 3 companies for violating the UN arms embargo on Libya. The sanctions, which include an asset freeze for the 3 companies, were reached at a meeting of EU foreign ministers in Brussels. 2 individuals were also sanctioned for human rights abuses in Libya. Reports say the 3 companies are from Turkey, Kazakhstan and Jordan. Libya has been in chaos since longtime ruler Colonel Muammar Gaddafi was deposed in 2011 by NATO-backed forces. The UAE backs rebel General Khalifa Haftar, while the Turkish government supports the rival government based in Tripoli. Now, Congolese rights activist Francois Soboni Chikunda has been chosen as the regional winner for Africa for UNHCR's Nansen Refugee Award, a prestigious annual prize that honors those who have gone to extraordinary lengths to support forcibly displaced or stateless people. This comes after she turned her traumatic past into a source of strength to help others. During the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, Chikunda survived a brutal attack in which her husband and children were killed. She subsequently endured violence, torture and rape at the hands of armed militiamen in her native Democratic Republic of Congo, who kidnapped her and held her as a slave for years. Chikunda managed to flee to Uganda in June 2017. Her own agonizing experiences led her to seek out other survivors of violence, and now she's a community leader, a volunteer teacher, and a counselor.
I went through a lot of things. I lost my home. I lost my family, my job, everything. I feel so nice teaching women and girls in these situations, because when we are busy, we are not idle. It makes our mind to focus on the future. My name is Saboni Françoise Chikunda. I'm a refugee myself, but I also help my fellow refugee women to improve their life.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has been placed on bed rest after catching a common cold. That's according to a minister in the presidency, Jackson Mthembu. Mr. Ramaphosa was scheduled to meet with officials of a health workers union, but the meeting has been rescheduled to later this week. The president last week eased coronavirus restrictions to level 1 beginning from Monday. In East Africa, teachers in Kenya have been asked to return to schools to help prepare for their reopening after the coronavirus lockdown. Schools in the country had been shut since mid-March amid the coronavirus pandemic and were due to remain closed until January 2021. But at a press conference in the capital, Nairobi, the Teachers Service Commission asked teachers to report back to schools on Monday. President Uhuru Kenyatta is expected to announce the dates for reopening of school after a national COVID-19 conference to be held next week. Let's get more on this story from Kenyan journalist Abby Agina, who joins us live from Nairobi. Abby, thanks for joining us on the program. You can hear. Great. Initially, the government said schools will not reopen until next year. Now they're asking teachers to return to school. Why the sudden turnaround?
Well, thank you so much. Well, so far, the country has continued to actually post a decline in the number of infections related to the novel coronavirus. And this seems to be the turning point that led the government to issue the directive that schools will be reopening. The number of cases have been reducing over the last few months. And right now, the average number of infections per day, according to the Ministry of Health, stand at about 150 to as low as 40 cases per day. This marks a huge, of course, a huge milestone for in the battle against the pandemic, which has continued to ravage many African countries, and Kenya is no exception when it comes to seeing the curve flattening. So that is one of the reasons why the government made an about turn in its decision of saying schools can actually reopen this year instead of next year in January.
Well, we understand that a national COVID-19 conference has been scheduled for next week. What can we expect from that conference?
Well, this is a very timely conference that has been convened by the president, that is His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta. And this particular conference will be literally charting a future post-COVID for Kenya. And of course, just to walk you through some of the key issues that this conference will be tackling, they'll be charting a responsible path forward for Kenya as a nation establishes the new normal of adapting to COVID. The conference will also see government leaders and political leaders outline a strategy for building and sustaining momentum with regard to recovery and resilience in a manner that ensures Kenya bounces back better and stronger. And the other key issue that this conference will be tackling will be, of course, to showcase some of the good practices that have strengthened economic resilience under the COVID-19 times. And as you know, Kenya's economy did take a big beating out of the economic slump that came out of this coronavirus. And lastly, this conference will also be honoring various persons who have emerged as the COVID-19 heroes due to their exemplary and selfless service to Kenya during the pandemic.
We look forward to that conference next week, Abby. But what are parents and students saying about the directive that teachers should return to schools to help prepare for their reopening? Are they comfortable returning to the classrooms before the end of the year?
Well, it's a very dicey situation, if you ask me. It's a mixed reactions. Some teachers, some parents are saying it's high time we reopen schools. And of course, the WHO had also issued guidance to African countries to consider reopening schools because of the far-reaching effects that the closure of schools had done. We've seen a rise in teen pregnancies in the country. We've also seen abuse of alcohol also being on the high, especially now that the kids are not fully engaged in school. So for the parents who have young ones, the general feeling is that we still need to give this some more thought and plan, especially in terms of dealing with how the schools are ready. Do the schools have isolation centers in case kids get infected or there are suspicious cases? There are concerns around, are there enough washing stations for hand washing in many of the public schools? And lastly, of course, most of the parents are also asking issues around social distancing in classes. How will this be achieved in a space and time where we see public schools having a huge upsurge of numbers, of course, knowing very well that Kenya has the free primary school education program. So it's still too early to say really where the parents stand. There are those parents who are also saying schools need to reopen because it's becoming unbearable for those with teenagers. So it's literally a wait and see situation. And both sides of the parents are holding so much ground that is actually pushing the government to actually hold that conference, which will be having some key resolutions that will guide the country into post-COVID. Will they be lifting the curfew? Will they be opening more of the sectors that have been shut down? All this is just but a question of time.
All right, then, Kenyan journalist Abiagina, thanks once again for joining us on Network Africa. Finally, on the program, let's take you to North Africa, where Algeria's local producers are trying to revive the country's historic production of wine. Once one of the largest exporters of wine to Europe, the country's decade-long war in the 1990s, which led to an armed insurgency in some parts of the country, has seen wine production declining drastically.
Algerian farmers fill large crates with juicy red and green grapes, later to be fermented into wine at a nearby factory. This is part of the country's efforts to revive its historic production of the alcoholic drink and support local producers. Hamadouche Damani, a 43-year-old wine producer, recently bought 4 wine cellars and maintains a 40-hectare vineyard as he tries to keep up with increasing demand locally and abroad.
Here in Algeria, we used to be among the world's premier wine exporters. We used to produce about 22 million hectoliters during the 40s, the 50s and the 60s, but now we've lost the market. We only produce about 400,000 hectoliters per year.
The winery and vineyard are located in Sidi Belebez province in western Algeria, once a center of the industry. Being a stronghold of armed Islamists during the country's decade-long war in the 1990s, wine production in Sidi Belebez came to a near halt.
We want to revive it, but we need help from the governments to plant the grapes. We can't keep up with the demand. We have the local markets and the external markets to think of.
In July, the government said that Algeria's economy contracted 3.9% in the first quarter of this year after a 1.3% growth in the same period in 2019. Growth in almost all sectors has been weakened since the authorities imposed a lockdown earlier this year aimed at curbing the spread of the coronavirus. However, the government said...
And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shuboale. Bye for now.